Payment technology as a means to enhance AML and KYC, with payment technologies pushing the envelope in all directions. The rippling effect into the regulatory and compliance scene hardly comes as a surprise. Moderated by Harmen Brenninkmejjer, Quanta plc, Reuben Portanier-afilexion, Andreas Glarner, MME, Rakele Cini, University of Malta, Robin Olsson, Bethard Group.
So thank you very much for all being here. Still early morning into the, let's say, experience of what I have within our industry, and therefore it's really appreciated. We're going to hit a subject that is quite, let's say, how shall I say, theoretical. We're going to try to make it a bit more interesting in order to really figure out as to what the solutions are. So my name is Harmen Brenninkmejjer. I run a number of smaller companies. Basically, I get into companies when companies are either in trouble or when I see a niche that should be developed, build it out, and then sell the company. It's basically what I've been doing in the gaming industry for 30 years. Reuben.
Good morning, everyone. I'm a partner at Afilexion. We provide advisory services for gaming operators and for fintech as well. And I'm a former regulator with the MGA.
Thank you. Andreas.
Good morning. Also from my side, I'm Andreas Glarner. I'm partner at MME, a Swiss consultancy law firm. We've been heavily engaged in fintech technology, where I'm heading our team, and been advising a lot of fintech startups in blockchain-related matters, and nowadays a lot of Swiss banks integrating blockchain technology to their core banking systems.
Good morning. My name is Rakele. I'm a lawyer by profession. I'm based here in Malta, and I focus mostly on advising firms in their AML KYC obligations.
Good morning, everyone. I'm on the operational side of the business. I've been in the industry since 2013, and I'm currently the head of payments, risk and support at the Bethard Group.
So Robert, let's start with you. What in general is the biggest issue related to, let's say, AML and KYC from your perspective as an operator?
The biggest issue is definitely the potential loss of revenue. If you have to bother customers, you risk losing them because they have to send documentation and everything like that. So we definitely have to target more paperless KYC solutions and automate the systems behind, instead of actually having to go and contact the customer themselves.
So from any of the other panelists, experience, etc., how do we react to that? Because I mean, at the moment we see that between the regulators and, let's say, the country requirements, the financial requirements, etc., there are a lot of discrepancies, or let's say, differences that somehow don't add up. So how are we going to be looking at that, Reuben?
If we had to look at the title that we have here today about how payments and the payment sector can facilitate AML in the gaming sector. If we had to look at what the regulations are in terms of AML, in terms of gaming regulations, we see that there are some legal impediments in order to make the process flow, in the sense that you can rely on what the KYC is happening at the payment service provider point of view, and rely on that information as a subject person as being a gaming operator. Mm-hmm. There are certain impediments. The rules of engagement on reliance, which is how much I can rely on the KYC performed by another party, right, although it might be related, is a bit tough. However, there may be new technologies we have just heard about the smart contracts in the right blockchain sphere. Okay. That could facilitate that.
Right. So at this stage, I mean, it's from country to country quite different. You're especially Swiss focused, but I believe you have quite a bit of experience in other countries.
Yeah, I think from our side, I fully agree with what has been said before. I think there are three main factors. The core one is costs, bringing down costs for KYC, AML, and this is done by, on the one hand, automation, which you have mentioned, and the other thing is harmonization. I think there, of course, we have FATF guidelines on AML compliance, but they apply to many financial industries, and they need to implement it, and the implementation varies from country to country. So that's always a bit of tricky part. And the third element, which is crucial, is digital identification. So you have a digital ID, and there, I think that if you look in the future, and if you look at the projects which are in the pipeline, I think this is going to be key, that you have a digital ID you can use, ideally cross-jurisdiction-wise, for fulfilling the KYC needs.
Right.
And their blockchain may play an important role.
Right. So before we go there and start talking about, you know, potential solutions, etc., you know, the here and about of today, we do have a lot of issues related to, you know, the AML and the KYC, and indeed, let's say, the fact that it's not harmonized.
Yeah. Well, I feel what my colleague here is saying, because from an operator's perspective, as much as possible, we do not want to disrupt the customer and keep asking for documentation. On the other hand, on the other side, the regulator is always there insisting on the obligations of understanding your customer, understanding his source of wealth and source of funds, which is one of the main areas that pains of operators. So there needs to be a good balance between keeping the customer happy, but obviously even keeping the regulator happy.
Yeah, but like, for example, in Malta, do you feel that, let's say, the Maltese regulations have, you know, considered, let's say, all of these issues well enough? Because it seems like, you know, there is quite a bit of, you know, let's say it's not exactly in sync between, you know, what the regulator says and the financial, you know, institutions. And
typically, regulations and the regulator is catching up always. Right. Technology is always moving fast, even the way our previous speaker was discussing matters. The legal basis at times is not yet there, and so slowly the regulator catches up to what the industry advances to. So even in terms of crypto and the fintech side, in Malta we already have the regulatory regime in that respect. It's been in Malta since November. So there are already progresses being made, even from the MGA side, the Malta Gaming Authority side.
right.
There's more I think that needs to be done.
Okay. I'm still quite confused on, let's say, the differences between what is required from the processor side as to what is required, let's say, from the operator side. From your perspective, is there anything, Reuben, that is really conflicting and that makes it, you know, as you said earlier, you know, quite tough?
I mean, since I started in the industry, it was definitely a bit more wild west, and now we're going into basically where I have to find payments agents that have been investigators earlier and everything, because it is really a lot of pressure, and it takes a lot of effort, time, and resources to actually manage this. And it's, how should I put it?
It's the biggest problem, right? With, let's say, as an operator, in order to try to figure out as to who your customer is, because effectively what you have to do, as you said, you have to start investigating, but what you really want is that a process done that information, right? So in other words, if I'm, you know, putting in, let's say, via the credit card, you know, in other words, that's linked to a bank, that automatically that, let's say, information is already being transferred, that you know, money is legitimately, you know, sitting in the bank account. So in other words, why are so many of these things still conflicting? Why is it that, you know, this doesn't, you know, jive well enough? Because I'm, you know, often amazed. It's like, you know, using a credit card in another country, suddenly you get cut off just because of the fact that the payment processor hasn't done its homework. Because depending on the, you know, the quality of the payment processor, you often, you know, get the right, you know, let's say, approval or not. And it's amazing when you travel around the world, etc., how different, you know, payment processors just work. Even though it could be, you know, if I go, for example, into the Philippines and I use a credit card in the Philippines from Cyprus, I can guarantee you'll run into problems. It is really difficult because most of the processors in the Philippines are cheap processors, and they really don't want to deal with anything that's remotely at risk.
Yes.
So how do we deal with this?
Well,
I mean,
in the EU, we've seen now the advent for a couple of years of PSD2, and PSD2 has one of the objectives is how to embrace innovative processes in order to speed up the process when it comes also to identifying customers and using, you know, certain key elements which are unique to the customer, such as, for instance, now, you know, using fingerprint technology instead of having a lot of passwords and what have you, using the dual authentication in order to make sure that the person is that. The issue, I believe here, is not on the KYC element of the payment processors. The issue here is that each entity, which is the payment processor and the gaming operator, they are both considered to be subject persons at law, and they have singular responsibilities at law, which makes it difficult, to have certain interactions.
Right.
And that is, I believe, one of the key elements that the industry is facing.
Right. So the interesting thing therefore comes, and this is where we can start talking about solutions, is when actually the customer is better educated to understand as to what the responsibilities are, or of either, let's say, the payment processor or the operator, right? You had some ideas around that when we started speaking earlier.
One element that could happen and catch up in the future is that instead of having the subject persons control the data that has to do with KYC, for instance, or AML, instead you would have actually the customers controlling the data. So you can use blockchain technology insofar as all the documentation that is pertaining to the person is stored over there, and it's actually the person who pushes his information, his KYC documentation, to the payment processor, to the gaming operator at the same time.
Right. So, Andreas, you're working in this space very specifically.
Yeah, we just had the first experiment from the city of Zug, that's in Crypto Valley, Switzerland. They have now launched a digital ID based on the Ethereum blockchain, where the government identifies and verifies the identity of a person. Then he receives a digital token, a digital ID, which he can use for governmental purposes. The idea obviously is to expand the use. Currently it's in a early stage testing mode, but it seems to work well. And I think this is going to be the future. Ideally, you have governmental authorities verifying identities, but that doesn't necessarily need to be the case. You could well imagine if you open a bank account, it's a Swiss bank, a Maltese bank, you have to go through the whole onboarding process, and why do that same process again the next day if you want to have a second bank account with another bank?
Right.
So this simply does not make sense. Economically, it doesn't make sense, but also from the user's perspective. And why not use this ID then to get access to a gaming account?
Right.
And most probably the users are thirsty for something like this. Who will they trust? So it's always a matter of trust, right? Who will I trust with all my data, and where will I put it? So maybe what Andreas is mentioning is the fact that there is a governmental authority or a quasi-independent authority that controls somehow. It may give me more peace of mind in today's age of privacy. Everyone is protective of their privacy. So that might be the first step. We would encourage people to use that.
But through the smart contracts, wouldn't that be easy in order to say I have a more decentralized solution in which, I once upload all of the information sits in some kind of a deposit, and I, as the consumer, have a hashtag code, and that code I make available to the operator, to the payment provider, to the bank, to whoever, and basically then they can take the information because I gave them the permission to do it once or whatever,
I think that's the system how it's going to be working. But you're nevertheless going to be needing one central entity verifying the information. And the question is, who shall that be? Who shall be the level of trust? And it's quite funny when we look at how crypto assets, cryptocurrencies, what you want to call them, are being kept. We have the non-custodial solution, we have the custodial solutions, and the trend is clearly that a lot of people don't want to be responsible for their own assets. They want to have someone they trust. So that's why a lot of banks are now starting to offer custody solution for digital assets. I think the same applies to digital ID.
But which information are we talking about that you would like to see, in a custodial manner? Is it the information about, let's say, if I provide my address, my passport, my etc., is it the agency that controls that whatever I provide is correct, or is it the one that stores it?
No, it's just verifying it's correct, confirming it's correct, but you control the data. The agency does not have the data.
Right.
The data vault, if you want to
so
call it that way, is in your control.
You're looking for that custodial that basically has the, that just checks off the boxes that everything is correct, what's sitting into your box.
Puts a stamp on, that's fine.
Okay.
And you can
exactly. So that's what we're looking for, right?
Yes.
Because at the moment there are a number of solutions already. I mean, I know of, for example, BlockPass, you know, there are several solutions already in the marketplace that are trying to push this very hard, and that that they're stronger outside gaming than within gaming. But within gaming, you know, they're also, you know, looking at how to address this. But the issues that you still have is they use all kinds of other agencies in order to take the information, you know, if you're on a blacklist, if you're somewhere, you know, there are all kinds of verification data banks that, let's say, do this professionally, right?
Of course, yes.
And that as a result, you know, let's say that the solution has to be, let's say, checked.
Yes, and from a European perspective, there are certain moves that are going to facilitate this even in the future. For instance, now we're talking of having a central register of PEPs, which before
bank accounts as well.
before didn't exist. Having a central repository of bank accounts. So all of those, wherever you have central repositories, it obviously facilitates the verification process.
Yeah.
The issue here is it's a cultural issue. So if we look at the Nordics, and Malta follows the same model as the Nordics, they're all accustomed to having their identity details being held by the government, and they trust the government. If you look at the UK, the UK don't even have the concept of an identity card, which is a physical card, let alone an electronic card. So over there, then you have cultural issues as well that would need to be resolved.
I think we definitely need to take a look at the Nordic countries where you have, for example, NemID in Denmark and BankID in Sweden, which simplifies the onboarding process, give the sufficient data and also the assurance that you have it's a customer, that you're actually, the name, date of birth, address and everything is a match.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, the complexity at the moment is, you know, becoming greater and greater because, I mean, if you live in different places, like, you know, more and more of us do, right? We don't live in one country, we live in, you know, various countries, various bank accounts, various addresses, various, you know, then it becomes much more complicated as to, you know, how do you streamline this? I mean, obviously within a country and within a licensing process, that's one thing. But Malta is licensing not just within the country, it licenses for, you know, way beyond. So what are the better solutions to that? Is that indeed, well, we know that potentially the solutions might be there, but how do we deal with it now? Who do we hold more responsible?
More responsible than any other. It will be hard. The regulator still, as Reuben mentioned, sees every single entity and as a separate subject person with their own separate obligations, definitely. So for now, that's the situation. That is where we're at. In the future, we might arrive at that solution. And maybe we can see it at an EU level then, rather than at a national level. And that could also facilitate and attract individuals.
Okay, so for the regulated markets it worked, for the unregulated markets there have whole other issues, of course.
Yeah.
You know, from a payment perspective. You know, we're not talking about the fact that they're unregulated, so therefore they don't really care, but from a payment perspective, they still need to get the money in, so.
Of course, yes.
So we just have a few, 1 minute left, but basically, I'd like to ask you, you know, how, so therefore, you know, please give a takeaway on, let's say, what you feel is, you know, the most important thing related to this particular issue, you know, today and, let's say, tomorrow.
Well, today, there are, as I mentioned before, legal impediments of how flexible the seamless process could be. But the future also, you know, with the aid of the new technologies and maybe the realization by supranational institutions and national institutions, we would probably see that we're going to have something which is streamlined.
Yeah, for me, I think I'll come back to my statement at the beginning. For me, compliance requirements become more complex every day, and that requires automation, so processes which are lean, which you're going to be able to share KYC data, ideally not only cross subjects, but also cross jurisdiction-wise.
What Andreas is mentioning, the automation, the digitalization is the way forward, definitely. And today's requirements then, today's maybe weaknesses and gaps would therefore be having the right experts to help you lead you to that digitalization, to be in line with the law, obviously.
It seems like we're going back to automation here. I mean, it is really the way forward because, first of all, paper documents, they have to be reviewed. It's very easy to fake them if you have the knowledge of just simple Photoshop. And it's also the speed of the process. It is the most important for a customer that everything runs smoothly.
Okay. So I'd just like to end it with basically a remark stating that I think as an industry we need to start educating our customers and basically make it easy for our customers to understand, you know, that it's their ultimate responsibility in order to help us, in order to make the process easy, in order for them to then have a better time or an easier, you know, let's say access to, you know, whoever they want to be with. So thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.